It's driving me nuts. People see the Ruy Lopez in every World Championship match. They see every top player play it. The Berlins in like every single game. It's the most studied opening on earth. And people still have no clue when their e-pawn can be taken and when it's actually defended, directly or indirectly. And it's crazy. It's like 2 or 3 things on a checklist. That's it. It's really not that difficult. Let's go for e4, see what he does, and we'll see what we want. What do we want to go for? What do we think? All right, we'll go knight f3. Seems like a good starting move. And we played a bishop c4 game. I'll go bishop b5. I think bishop c4 at lower elos is much more destructive. The games can end a lot faster. But I'm going to go bishop b5. Ruy Lopez. The thing about the Ruy Lopez is you're not going to get things like, you know, completely winning positions in the Ruy Lopez out of the opening usually. Like, for example, I got someone playing the Berlin against me at 500. Does he really know everything there is to know about the Berlin? We'll find out. Do I know everything there is to know about the Berlin? Definitely not. So we've castled. Now he's gone a6 and takes on e5 is extremely tempting. The one thing that I will say is that people, they do not know. I truly think this is the case. They do not know when the e-pawn is actually hanging for black. So let me know if that sounds like it's the exact same thing that your brain is saying right now. But you guys are maybe familiar after watching other people play it, strong players. It's in the World Championship. People leave this pawn hanging because it looks like you just take the knight and win the pawn. But, you know, it's like 60% of the time, the pawn is not actually hanging. Like, you go to take it and it just equalizes and like, oops, you shouldn't have taken it. Or it's not actually hanging, dude. But the other 40% of the time, it is hanging. And you have to be careful not to do that. So I feel like there is a very large demographic, a very big amount of people who don't actually know for what reasons the pawn is defended and for what reasons the pawn is not defended. And it makes playing the Ruy Lopez from either side quite difficult because you don't really know what you're looking for. You don't know, like, am I supposed to be doing this, this, and this so that I'm threatening to take the pawn? Once you know what goes into the pawn being protected or indirectly protected, so it's not actually there to take, then you know exactly what to be careful of. But this, for example, this is an example where I'm a little concerned for my opponent. Number one, he's taken with the B pawn instead of the other way, with the D pawn. But the reason that I'm concerned is this move. Now, rook e1 to hit the knight, it's all well and good. I'm a little more concerned in this position that if I attack the knight, it'll return to c5 and go to e6. I can't have that. So the first move I need to do is rook e1. I'm pinning the knight. There's no way my opponent can remove both of these pieces from the e file. It's impossible, not in one move. And my next move is going to be pawn here. So we're winning a piece here already. That's how quickly it happens in the Ruy Lopez. After the game, I'm going to go over, I think, a few important and basic points about when is the e-pawn defended, when is it not, and hopefully it helps. But for now, we can at least appreciate that that was clearly a situation where the e-pawn was hanging. So yeah, d3. I mean, this definitely hurts, but he can still make a game out of this. He's only gonna be down a piece, and he does get to take it back. You know, I wonder if he's gonna support it like that, or how he's gonna get the bishop back, because he still can't castle, and castling that way does not look good. Open B file. So yeah, this is the intention. Knight C3 next as well. G6, so we see what my opponent's interested in. Clearly, it's bishop to G7. And then castle, which honestly makes a lot of sense. It really does. The unfortunate part about G6 and going bishop G7 is it's a little bit slow and it's very weakening. And after the pawn takes back here, my opponent is, I mean, he's got double pawns, they're doubled and isolated. He's down a piece, and the only piece developed is the queen. We're on move 10, and the only piece developed is the queen. Of course, that's the nature of the position, but it is a pretty big mistake. So a move like queen d4, with a couple threats here, I'm gonna play rook takes e4 and queen takes h8, and that's off the back of the move g6. So this is quite punishing for black to see, because it's really made possible because of g6. And pawn to c5 does not really do anything about this. So let's go ahead and take that in the corner. I know it's tempting to try to win the queen, but a free rook is insanely valuable, and I'm not really gonna ever win the queen because of bishop e6. So I'd rather focus on bishop h6 here. F5. There's a good looking move from my opponent. I'm going to continue with this bishop and bring it to h6. There's a pin there, so look, even if I end up playing this and we trade everything on that square, trade a bishop and a queen for a bishop and a queen, that's in my favor because I'm up, what, a rook and a knight? My opponent only will have a bishop and a rook left, and I'll have 2 rooks and 2 knights. So I'm going to have an extra piece and an extra rook. Knight c3, rook d1. Those are all the moves on my mind. If pawn takes knight at any point, obviously my opponent's losing their queen. But at this moment, queen takes f8 would be the much stronger move. Okay, so this is an example of this move actually being possible, right? Pawn takes there. I think I can actually, you know, play a move like this, and I'm trying to remember, has that king moved? And I think the answer is actually no. The king is not moved, right? Which means long castle is possible. Then the rook will end up on d8, and then if I take this, there's rook takes, which will gain time attacking my queen. So I'm actually not very interested in that. I'm gonna start by taking, seemingly forcing the queen to take. And even if I trade the queens there, like I said, I'm up a rook and a knight. It's a lot. We can open up the game review here, but the reason that I want to look at this game review is actually to show you guys about that pawn in the beginning. I think that's what ultimately we need to get from this game is, when is the pawn hanging? So first of all, this is the Berlin, right? Knight f6, that's the Berlin. Most people don't play the Berlin. Most people play a6. So when you play a6, I mean, this is just basically the main line of the Ruy Lopez. You play a6. Now, if white takes, this is the most classic situation. Is the pawn hanging here? Now, definitely the answer is no. If you take the pawn, it's indirectly defended from a clever idea that black can do. And you could do it in any which way you like, but queen d4 is the most direct. You attack the knight and you attack the pawn. So you win the pawn back immediately. So it's not hanging. And that should be obvious, because why would a6 be literally the main line? right? Why would knight f6 be the Berlin if you could just walk in and take this? Of course not. So a6, this is not a threat. Of course you can still play bishop takes knight as white. It's a great line. But no, you're not winning a pawn right away. So you would castle or something. Right? And now maybe we're looking at winning the e-pawn. Now, here's a question which should benefit your learning. Why is white threatening to take on e5 now? For example, why are all the top engine moves f6, bishop g4, queen e7, queen f6, bishop d6? Why is white threatening to take the pawn now? Yes, the king is no longer on e1. So that should already be a notch registering in your brain that when white castles, all of a sudden that pawn sort of becomes hanging. Not every time white castles, but that when you castle, the idea is that pawn hangs because what was black previously relying on? Let's just make a random move to show. Oh, they were using this trick, right? But now white can just go back, and because the e-file is wide open, direct line to the king, e4 cannot be taken, and rook e1 wins the queen. So the pawn is now hanging after white castles. Right? Now, if white castles in this position, already black should be thinking, okay, it's time to defend this pawn. Let me show you something else. For example, let's say in this case here, let's say they don't take, let's say white goes back, right? Instead, or let's say actually white takes. And instead of castling, white does something different. Let's say white goes d3. In this case, why are black's top moves f6, bishop d6, bishop g4, queen d6, queen e7? Why is the pawn hanging now? Ah, yes. Thank you. This might seem ultra basic, but I promise you, people don't understand this. The pawn is defended. Now, the pawn is not just defended by a knight or something. The pawn is defended by like the best possible thing it could be defended by, which is another pawn. Meaning, when that queen comes down here, for this tactic, once again, it's no longer a tactic. Knight f3, and guess what? You can't even take. So, we've already established two big reasons that you should always keep in your head for when this pawn is hanging. It's hanging when the e-pawn is defended, and it's hanging when white is castled. Okay, now let's look at it from the other perspective. Let's say in this case, we do exactly like the game. Knight f6, this is my game that I just played. Let's say that I take, or actually we could castle, right? And now after castling, black, I mean, let's just say they play the move bishop to e7. Now, why is the e-pawn not hanging here? Because I thought we just said when white castles, the pawn is hanging. So why is the e-pawn not hanging here? For example, like this. Why is it not hanging? If your answer to why this pawn is not hanging is that this pawn is hanging, then you're very, very wrong. And you need to fix that thought process. Because if this bishop was there and I took your pawn and you took my pawn, you would be screwed. That would be very similar to what happened in my game. I would bring my rook here and you'd be dead along the e-file. The reason that it's not working is actually because of this bishop. Nothing to do with the fact that the pawn on e4 is hanging. The bishop is the reason that it's fine to take it. Because when I go rook e1, this simply doesn't matter anymore. This is not relevant because there's a bishop in the way and black's about to castle. It's completely safe. For example. So from both sides, this is something that we're going to start paying attention to. Now we know that in order for this pawn to be hanging, d3 has to be played or castle. But if we're castled, that's also not enough. We also have to check if the e file is open. So if we're castled, but our opponent's bishop on e7 is on e7, then guess what? It's probably not hanging. But let's say we castle, our opponent plays bishop e7, and we play d3. Well, when you see d3, this kind of is like the trump card. Once you see d3, e4 is protected for sure. Every single time d3 is on the board, that pawn is 100% hanging. That's a guarantee. So then it's time to do something about that. And that's why you'll see in this position, black's only move that's reasonable according to the engine is d6. Because now it is just like an imperial mandate to defend that pawn as black. No other move is sufficient here except d6. You need to defend it. Because now, not only is white castled, okay, you parried that, but d3 has been played. Now e4 is clearly protected. Or now e4 is clearly protected. So you can go ahead and apply these things to a very basic Ruy Lopez position that a strong player might play and try to understand why these guys are not concerned leaving a pawn on e5 hanging for like 20 moves. For example, one of the main lines of the Ruy Lopez is with a6, bishop a4, right? Knight f6. Now in this position, as soon as white plays d3, black cannot casually play a move like this because the same thing is going to happen. e5 is hanging because e4 is now defended with the pawn. Let's play the move knight c3, and black plays the move bishop e7. Now, we've got our pawn defended, so we're going to take on c6 and win the pawn. Well, here you go. This is another example of why the pawn is not hanging. Black has a very sneaky trap, a sneaky tactic. Knight takes e4, and the queen comes out to d4 again, this time forking the two knights. And surprisingly, think as hard as you want, you aren't actually able to save both of them. Very strange. And you aren't even able to sacrifice one of them and get a pawn back. You'll actually lose in that case. So, is the e-pawn being defended by a pawn or a knight or a queen the exact same thing? No. The pawn being defended by another pawn means 100% it is time for black to defend the e-pawn. But if they defend it with a knight, that's not necessarily the case. As I just outlined, black can actually play bishop e7. And a good player will probably play bishop e7, knowing that they have this trick available. So once again, the pawn is not up for grabs. But if you saw the move d3 here, then absolutely it would be time to do something about that. You would now need to defend this pawn. Now, in this position, let's say white castle. This is actually still the main line. Bishop e7, we already talked about this. The pawn is not hanging because the bishop's on e7, right? So bishop e7, and now white could do any number of moves, but let's say rook e1. Rook e1, after we're castled, once we're castled, we could defend with knight c3, we could defend with rook e1. As soon as the pawn is defended and white's castled, guess what? It's time to defend e5 once again. So now the pawn's defended, which is why in this position, you will always see b5. You'll always see d6. b5 is indirectly defending this pawn, of course, because it's leaving the knight there and preventing bishop c6. So these are the only two moves that black can really play. The only moves. So in case you're wondering why the move order of the Ruy Lopez is the way that it is, this is the answer. There are certain things that both players, once you're at a higher level, both players fully understand about this opening, which is there is a certain amount of things that need to be true for this pawn to be hanging. There's also a certain amount of things that need to be true for the pawn to be defended. Both sides, if they're aware of all these things, can use them when they're thinking about what moves they want to do. As white, you're thinking, oh, am I castled? Is my pawn defended on e4? Then I'm ready to take on e5. As black, you're thinking about those things. Can I leave my pawn hanging another move? So that's it. That's what both sides are thinking about in their heads, or maybe not thinking about because it's second nature and they've already studied it for so long. That's what they're thinking about when they're playing the first 5 to 6 moves of Ruy Lopez theory. Now, what did my opponent do in my game? Knight f6, castles, a6. Guess what? There's no bishop on e7, and my king is castled, so I know that the rook is going to go to e1 with devastating effect. Did I calculate this and try to work out whether it was actually good for me? No, I didn't calculate it. I just know. I know the principles that I just told you, and I literally just said, okay, there's no bishop there. It's a wide open file. I'm castled. I can take it. And I just thought about that, and then I did it. And that's why I won a pawn. My opponent surely wants to even the score by getting a pawn back, and as a result, ends up losing the game. Very quickly as well. Rant over. Hopefully that wasn't too basic. It's driving me nuts. People see the Ruy Lopez in every world championship match. They see every top player play it. The Berlins in like every single game. It's the most studied opening on earth. And people still have no clue when their e-pawn can be taken and when it's actually defended, directly or indirectly. And it's crazy. It's like 2 or 3 things on a checklist. That's it. It's really not that difficult. But if you never bother to look into it or no one ever told you, then I guess you'll never know.